Hey, and welcome to episode 43 of Think Like a Hacker, the podcast where we explore security, WordPress, and innovation. Today we've got an awesome episode. WordPress 5.3 is scheduled for release in November after WordCamp US, so we'll be chatting about that. We've got an ongoing Malvertising campaign that has evolved, and it's adding backdoors and is targeting new plugins, so we're going deep on that. And then we've got a funny story about Wix trolling WordPress, so we'll briefly cover that. But get ready for an awesome episode. All right, Kathy, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Happy September.
Oh my goodness, is it? I guess it is.
It's September. Yeah. Oh yes. In Phoenix, September is cause for celebration.
Oh wow.
I mean, summer's almost over.
Yeah, I guess WordCamp US is coming up pretty quickly, huh?
It is. Less than 2 months. Very excited about that.
Yeah. So it's St. Louis this year. I should know because we've been doing a lot of organizing around that.
Yeah, it's St. Louis this year, so right in the heart of the country, so it'll be exciting.
Yeah, for sure. So WordPress 5.3 is scheduled for release in November, right after WordCamp US. And what's the story there? What's new in 5.3?
A number of things are new. The release date is going to be November 12th, so about 10 days after WordCamp US wraps up. But Beta 1 is expected to be released September 23rd, and the release candidate is scheduled to follow October 15th. I read about this in WP Tavern, but there were some additional articles about it as well. So the new theme that's going to be bundled with 5.3 is the 2020 theme. So everything will be ready for next year. I can't believe it's 2020 already.
Yeah, so let me ask you about those themes real quick. And
yeah.
I literally don't know the answer to this. This is not scripted or anything. But in my experience, these sort of default themes that come with WordPress are, not to sort of diss anyone, but they seem kind of similar. Are they, or is that just my imagination?
I mean, there's some distinct differences year by year. Obviously, I remember the succulent one. Right. I think it was 2017.
Well, you remember that because that succulent ended up on didn't a bunch of WordPress sites revert to the succulent when there was some kind of downtime on WordPress.com or something like that?
What was it? I think it was VIP sites had a networking issue, and so everything defaulted to the default theme.
To the succulent.
So the most popular succulent on the internet.
There you go.
Yeah. So, I mean, there have been, each year there's a new theme that comes out. I think there was one that was skipped, but I think 2018 actually got skipped. But yeah, it just kind of shows that, WordPress is leveraging, my favorite word, leveraging like the new features and capabilities of what WordPress has to offer. So 2020 will be interesting to see. We now have a year of Gutenberg kind of under our belts. So
right.
There are new developments coming out in 5.3. Allowing basically to divide a page up into sections, which obviously you can't do with the old, classic editor. Motion is going to be added so that when you are moving or rearranging blocks within a page, it will sort of have a motion kind of effect to show you that you're moving things around. There's going to be support for fixed width columns and predefined layouts, and then being able to save your progress after a big image fails to upload, and media accessibility. There's some fixes in Polish as a result of the accessibility audit that we reported on in a previous episode. There will be new support for PHP version 7.4, which is coming in November. And there'll be better administration of emails and a lot of under the hood improvements. But I know that this SEO community is really excited about changes to the way you tell Google not to index your site. Did you read about this, Mark?
Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting, and I guess I used to have strong SEO foo back in the day, but I haven't kind of been hands-on in SEO for a couple of years now. I just work with experts in SEO. And I guess I learned a little bit about this. So robots.txt, I assumed that it was how you tell Google to not index something. And I think that we've all kind of assumed that. And it turns out that robots.txt, and this is intuitive if you think about it, but it actually is telling Google, don't crawl my site. But if Google can get the content of a page by another means, then it'll put that page in its index having not crawled your site, and therefore having respected your wishes in robots.txt, which tell Google to not crawl your site. And so the way you actually prevent something from being in Google's index is by putting it in a meta tag. And so they're changing their approach to in WordPress 5.3 to how WordPress tells Google to not put something in its index, and that is they're using meta tags, and the meta tag says, it isn't saying don't crawl this page, it is saying don't put this page in your index at all, whether or not you've crawled it. And so it's a more reliable approach to ensuring that certain pages don't end up in Google's index. Now I know like a lot of the folks out there, including ourselves to a certain extent, really kind of like being in Google's index, and so you ask yourself, well, why on earth would I not want a page to be in Google's index? Well, different people have different priorities, and some pages are very performance intensive. For example, they take a lot of CPU to generate, and Google's crawlers, if you've ever tailed a web log file and watched Google crawling, it can get pretty aggressive. And so if you have an area of your site that requires a lot of CPU to generate, then or database queries to generate, then you kind of don't want Google to crawl that, especially if it doesn't matter to you whether that's in the index or not. I'm thinking about some GIS pages, government GIS pages in Colorado that I was looking at recently, which take forever to load. And if Google crawled those, it would literally DDoS the server. And so that's kind of a reason that you might want to do that. But I think that I think the flow here, the UX flow, Kathy, if I recall correctly, I haven't installed WordPress for a little bit, but when you install WordPress, it asks you, do you want to hide this site from Google, right?
Yeah, there's actually something in the general settings. There's a checkbox where you can hide the site from Google.
Yeah. And so that will now include meta tags rather than editing a robots.txt, which is telling Google to not put it in the index, not just to not crawl it. So I think that's what's going on there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I'm excited to see 5.3 out in the wild. For
sure. So Mikey continued, him and the Threat Intel team, Sean Murphy's Threat Intel team, which is part of Wordfence, of course, have continued their research into this Malvertising campaign. I guess their first blog post, let me just check the date over here, but I think it was early July, I think.
Yeah, it was in July, July 22nd.
Yeah.
Was the first time they took looked at some data going on with this Malvertising campaign.
Right, and then I guess they posted an update recently. Do you want to give us the TLDR and then what the latest update is?
Sure. Okay, so in July they started seeing, we'll just call it a baddie, a threat actor going after some coming soon maintenance mode plugin vulnerabilities that were announced, and that had about 7,000 installations. And then we saw them starting to go after some larger plugins with vulnerabilities, the Yellow Pencil Visual CSS Style Editor plugin, as well as Blog Designer plugin, which both had some unauthenticated one had an unauthenticated arbitrary options update, and the other was an unauthenticated stored cross-site scripting problem. And both of these plugins had about 30,000 install base, so they were a juicy target for this threat actor. Last week, they took another look at this campaign, and they found that they had expanded the number of vulnerable plugins that they sort of had in their sites. And they were seeing them go after, all of these plugins had well over 20,000 install bases. So the Bold Page Builder, which had some missing access controls, had a 20,000 install base. The live chat with Facebook Messenger had a 20,000 install base. Uso related posts, I couldn't get the install base on that because it actually is still vulnerable. If someone does have this one on their site, they definitely need to find a replacement. Our firewall is protecting against this, but there's no update available, and that had an unauthenticated call any action or any update any option vulnerability. So if you're using Uso related posts, definitely get rid of that one. The yellow pencil one, the WP live chat support, had a 50,000 install base and had a cross-site scripting vulnerability, as well as quite a few others. So as we saw this happening, it became pretty much we could see what they were going after. They were looking at option updates, and they were looking at cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. And they were coming from one IP address, and that IP address was at a hosting provider, Rackspace. So we contacted them last week, and you had a conversation with them, what was it, yesterday?
Yeah. So I guess when this started off, there were several hosting providers that we saw attacks coming from, and then when we did the update recently, we looked at the data again, and the attacks were actually just coming from one IP, and we included the IP in the blog post. But as we were prepping for the podcast yesterday afternoon, and it is now Wednesday, 10:15 Mountain Time, so this was Tuesday afternoon, we thought we'd do diligence. And so Mikey, the researcher behind this research, had reached out to Rackspace last week via their abuse reporting system. They have an abuse email address. And we didn't get a response from them. We got an automated response with a ticket number, but a human didn't get back to us. And so we thought, before we talk about this even more, we better try to do everything we can to reach out to them. And so I got their support number and I called that. And after negotiating with a support person who was polite for a few minutes, I managed to get someone from the security team on the line. And I conferenced in Mikey, who was kind enough to take the call because he was literally busy getting off a plane, rushing to a conference. And so we had the three of us on the line, and we managed to get them to look up the ticket. They confirmed that they'd received the abuse report and that they'd actually contacted the customer. And so I think their standard procedure is that they will just forward the report to the customer unless there are multiple abuse reports. And they hadn't received multiple abuse reports about this IP, which is surprising because we're seeing many attacks per day coming from this IP. And so the other thing that I said is that I thought was interesting is that they can't access the server or take it down without talking to the customer. And the impression I got is that they actually physically can't access the server. They don't have root on the boxes, so they're leasing out VMs, virtual machines, and they hand over administrative control of those VMs, or maybe it's even bare metal, to the customer, and they no longer have access. But of course, they own the network and probably the IP address that the customer is using, and so they are accountable for ensuring that IP is behaving responsibly. And if you think about it, if you sort of take it to the nth degree, that if there is blowback because one of their IPs is attacking a large section of the internet, that costs them. Potentially that IP is blacklisted, which kind of removes it from being useful to them and being able to lease it to other customers. It could affect other customers on the same box if they're sharing that IP with other customers, and it could lead to their entire IP block, that entire prefix, that subnet, from getting blacklisted, or in fact even their ASN. So it has real consequences. And so it's interesting just chatting with a hosting provider who has delegated control of this box to someone else. You sort of, they have to walk a fine line of, well, when do we intervene? And if we can't get hold of the customer, and it sounds like they haven't had much success, what do they then do? Do they take that server offline and have the customer shout at them and be very angry and maybe even breach a contract? Who knows? But anyway, we made it clear that out of the hosts that we're seeing attacks from, they're the last remaining hosting provider. We also shared some data with them about the root cause of the infection, which we won't share on the podcast because it's a little bit sensitive, and we might share it once that IP is actually taken down, or once the site's taken down. But it sounds like they're on top of it, and they're aware of the urgency of the issue, and that this compromised IP is being used as an attack platform. I don't have any bad feelings towards Rackspace. I think they've had a sterling reputation for a long time. Your mileage may vary, but they're not sort of one of the baddies out there. This, I think, is an isolated incident, and they were certainly easy to reach. When I phoned their support line, someone actually answered within a reasonable amount of time, maybe 30 seconds or something like that. And then after explaining the situation to the support folks, I did get someone from the security team online, which is really cool, because that can be very hard to do. So clearly their customer support is responsive, and their security team is available, and hopefully they'll take this down and remediate it. So yeah, that's the story there, Kathy.
Yeah, and this story this research that we posted was picked up by a number of media organizations, including Forbes, which had an article that they titled "Critical Backdoor Attack Warning Issued for 60 Million WordPress Users," which was a little
clickbaity. Is that the word you're looking for?
I was trying to find a nice way of saying that, because that's not really the entirety of what we reported. Yes, there's 60 million WordPress users. Yes, there is a backdoor attack, because there's backdoors being placed on these vulnerable sites. So yes, that's happening. But to put that all into one headline, it kind of got some legs, and I think Wix actually saw this headline.
Was it actually this research that Wix tweeted? I didn't realize it was this research.
It was our research, and it was this clickbaity title that Forbes published, and that's what got us into our next story, which was Wix had posted on Twitter, sort of a little trollish type of comment about WordPress security, which didn't really have much basis in fact, because it was, obviously we know the original research. We just explained what was going on, but Wix tweeted, "Hey WordPress, need help or a hug maybe?" What do you think about that?
With a link or a screenshot of the article.
Yes.
Oh man, can I rant? Because that's my core competency. You're good at the professional stuff. I'm the ranter. Can I?
You're the ranter. Okay. All right. I'm gonna take the leash off. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So firstly, why would you do that, Wix? Why? I have so many thoughts about this. So I think it's really unfortunate. And, just to be clear, it might be some junior marketing person over at Wix that thought this was a good idea. So I'm not going to beat up on them too badly, but I think it's worth addressing this approach in general of, one vendor making fun of another vendor because they had a security issue. And I did a little tweet storm about this earlier, but it's funny, that this phrase that I came up with, Kathy, that a vulnerability is just a celebrity bug?
Yes.
Do you know where do you remember where I came up with that?
I don't know.
Do you remember we were having cider with Matt Mullenweg at was it one of the WordCamp US's? Portland, right? It was
Portland.
Yeah. Right. And him and I were chatting, and it was the first time we had an opportunity to really chat, and we were really connecting about WordPress security and kind of the tension between security researchers like us and the vendor, or in WordPress's case, the community behind it, and their goals of, getting the software out there in the hands of users and so on. And I just, off the cuff, I described a vulnerability to him as that. And it really stuck with me. I've used that phrase several times, but that's all a vulnerability is it's a celebrity bug. It's a bug that tends to get more attention because it's a little scary. It also is more interesting. It's in the security space, which means hackers and things like that, criminals and so on. And so it has a sort of romance about it as well, I guess. and so I think back in the sort of days before the security industry matured, vulnerabilities would get a lot of attention, either by the researcher going out there and saying, look at this scary thing and I discovered it, and see how smart I am and how well I'm doing to protect you and so on. Or press would latch onto it and go, you need to know about this right now, and click on our headline because our headline is really scary too. And when you click on our headline, we'll get more ad impressions and so on, right? So there's this kind of ecosystem that exists around making vulnerabilities seem as scary as possible. And as the security industry has matured, researchers like us and other folks, and I would include, the good companies out there, Securi, Cloudflare, although they're, I don't know that they do a ton of research, although they do research into networks. But security companies in general, we've gotten really careful about making sure that we deliver the data, and we really temper the message to say, here's what's happening. There's no drama, and here's what you need to know to fix the issue if you're a user of the software, and here's what you need to know if you're a vendor making a firewall to help protect your customers from this threat. And so our research is exactly that. You'll notice in this blog post, I think Mikey has included IOCs, indicators of compromise. And those IRCs are for other vendors who need to protect their customers against this. They can block those IPs, they can blacklist those domain names, they can add detection for the malware samples. I think he included hashes in this one as well. So if you see those hashes, if you're doing a scan and you're an AV vendor, you can tell the customer that they're infected and they need to do something about it. And that's the goal, right? That's the goal with all this research. Right. And it's nice for us to get press coverage when we publish this, but it's always a little bit disappointing when the press coverage is very kind of over dramatizes it or adds drama. And sometimes that's not even the journalist. Sometimes that's the editor that does that. They're like, okay, how can we get the maximum mileage out of this to achieve our business goals? And so they'll dramatize the headline. Yeah,
always throw the marketing person under the bus when something like this happens.
Well, as a marketing person, I appreciate you saying that. But yeah, and then there's the other side of what just happened here, which is Wix is a competitor to WordPress. They're a commercial CMS. They're a direct competitor. They're trying to get WordPress customers or users to come over to Wix. And what they did is, let me just look at the tweet so that I can really get wound up about this. As my Twitter loads. But anyway, I think it was something along the lines of, here we go. Hey WordPress, need help or a hug maybe? And it's from the official verified Wix account, which has 412,000 followers, head desk. And they included a screenshot of, well, actually, I guess this is a retweet, but they've included a tweet of the Forbes article, which says critical backdoor attack warning issued for 60 million WordPress users. And Forbes is citing our research, which is, like I said, we work to make this data driven, but they've really put it on steroids, and then Wix jumped on that and decided that they needed to say that. And if you ignore the drama and the political issues around that and so on, and you just look at it as a marketing strategy, I don't think it's a really good one, because their goal, I assume, is to bring WordPress customers over to their platform. And those WordPress customers are currently using WordPress. And so, what you're saying to those customers is that they're idiots, and that Wix is the smart one. And in marketing, you don't want to do that. It's not about telling the customer that they're an idiot. It's about helping them solve their problems, and doing it in a non-disingenuous and an effective way by just creating a good product, being so good that you can't be ignored. Right? And so I think that Wix needs to focus on being so good that they can't be ignored, rather than trying to scare folks into coming over to their platform. Now, they fired the first shot, so just for fun, I'll fire a shot back. So Wix actually had a vulnerability back in 2016, late 2016, that ZDNet reported on. And the headline on ZDNet predictably included the word millions, because that's how you get the clicks. But Wix.com, a security flaw places millions of websites at risk, and that was ZDNet's headline. And And so this was an XSS vulnerability that actually would give someone the ability to gain admin on a Wix site. And so, Wix is not without fault themselves when it comes to vulnerabilities. But like I said, that's okay. I don't think any less of Wix because of that. And I think that when a vulnerability is discovered and disclosed to a vendor and it's fixed and the fix is released before the vulnerability is reported, that's a huge win. And it actually says really good things about that vendor. It says that their security team is available, they're responsive, they know how to fix a vulnerability in a timely fashion. It also says great things about the researcher. It says that the researcher followed protocol, contacted the vendor, and followed the sort of disclosure norms, gave the vendor time to actually fix the vulnerability, get it released, and then the customer is safer at the end of it. And so that when you see a story like this or any of the other vulnerabilities that we report, that is a good thing, because it's telling you that WordPress is fixing their vulnerabilities in a timely fashion. The difference, though, with Wix is that this vulnerability affected every single one of their customers.
Right.
Most WordPress vulnerabilities, in fact, I would say, I need to think about this, but if I'm not mistaken, all WordPress vulnerabilities never affect all WordPress customers. I want to just pause and think about that for a sec. Is that true, Kathy? I mean, it's usually a plugin or a theme. I guess core, but there's multiple versions. So I guess a core vulnerability would affect a lot of people. So.
Right. I mean, the REST API vulnerability that was in version 4.7, that affected everyone, but the speed at which it was fixed and just the response from the community and the firewall rules that we put out, the response from the community and what was done after that, it was fixed so quickly, and that was over 2 years ago was the last major vulnerability that affected sort of a widespread installation.
Right, yeah. So, and core vulnerabilities often don't affect all versions. So, there's that. But anyway, all right. So maybe I don't get to say that, but I do think that seeing an open source project or a vendor that is responsive is a happy event, and I don't think one should make fun of another vendor because they have a vulnerability, because it's kind of like saying, oh, look, you've got bugs in your product, which is absurd because everyone writes bugs. That's just a standard dev workflow, and then you get them fixed. So, all right, so that's the Wix story, and that's the end of me on my soapbox there, Kathy. Anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I think it's great that marketers try to be fun, but. And I think that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to be fun. They were trying to be funny. They were, Wendy's, for example, has a Twitter account that can often, poke fun at, like, when IHOP introduced burgers, it's like, well, what happened to your pancakes? And they were poking fun. But I mean, when you're talking about CMS, you're talking about where people are like putting everything, right? And it's not just like a meal. So to me, it's just like having fun as a marketer is great, but poking fun at your competition, I think you need to really think through, the chess moves of what that entails before you jump into that.
So maybe a good analogy is Burger King poking fun at Wendy's because of a new burger that they launched, right? That's a happy event, and that's okay. Or Burger King poking fun at Wendy's because they just had a data breach.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't do that. Yeah.
Right. So. And I mean, the thing is like Wendy's will poke fun at they have a lot of fun with their Twitter account. It's actually quite hilarious, and they'll come up with some really good ones sometimes. But it's never done in sort of a point on the school grounds, point fun at the kid and make fun of them. And this one was actually not even based in fact. So it just kind of like was, I don't know, fall into like the gross category in my mind.
I was going to say the ew category.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't work, you guys, but I don't want to discourage you from trying better next time.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Try again, Wix. You'll get it right next time. We're rooting for you.
We believe in you.
We believe in you. All right. Well, I think that's about it for this week's news. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, definitely give us a rating to let us know how we're doing. And if you want to get hold of us, if you have any tips or anything like that, you can reach out to us at press@wordfence.com. And we very much appreciate any tips or any feedback. And that's it for this week's podcast. So have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye, everyone.